What happens on spring break stays on spring break, or does it? 2 stories of when spring break goes wrong. Have any of you been on spring break? Tell me in the comments below. It was spring break, and a group of 5 friends had rented a cabin in the deep woods for the week. They had all been looking forward to getting away from the stresses of school and work and spending some quality time together. On their first night in the cabin, they decided to break out a spirit board. They had heard about them and were intrigued by the idea of contacting the dead. None of them truly believed in the supernatural, but they thought it would be fun to try. The cabin was cozy with a large living room, a kitchenette, and 2 bedrooms. It was the perfect spot to unwind and enjoy some much-needed relaxation. As they sat around the spirit board, they each placed their fingertips on the planchette and began to ask questions. At first, nothing happened, and they all laughed it off, thinking it was just a silly game. But then, the planchette began to move on its own. The group became nervous, but none of them wanted to be the first to pull their fingers away. They continued to ask questions, and the answers they received were cryptic and eerie. They asked for the spirit's name, and it spelled out Zara. The friends didn't know anyone named Zara, so they asked more questions, hoping to get more information. The spirit board spelled out a series of letters that didn't make any sense, so they asked it to spell out the words instead. As the spirit board spelled out the words, the atmosphere in the cabin changed. The air became heavy, and the room grew colder. The friends began to feel uneasy and were ready to stop playing. But it was too late. The spirit board had awakened something, and now it was too powerful to stop. The group tried to leave the cabin, but the doors and windows wouldn't budge. They were trapped. They huddled together in the living room, hoping to wait out whatever was happening. But then, they heard a sound coming from the kitchenette. It was the sound of a drawer opening and closing, followed by footsteps. The friends were terrified. They didn't know what to do. They thought about calling the police, but they didn't have any cell phone signal. Suddenly, the door to the living room burst open, and a woman appeared in the doorway. She was dressed in a long, flowing gown, and her hair was tangled and wild. Her eyes were black as coal, and her skin was pale as a ghost. The friends screamed in terror as the woman floated towards them. They tried to run, but their feet wouldn't move. The woman reached out her hand and touched the planchette. The board began to glow, and the woman disappeared. The friends were left alone in the cabin, but they knew they weren't truly alone. They could feel a presence lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. As the night wore on, the friends began to hear strange noises. Footsteps in the hallway, whispers in their ears, and screams in the distance. They were too afraid to move and too afraid to sleep. The next morning, they woke up to find that one of their friends was missing. They searched the cabin, but she was nowhere to be found. They knew they had to leave the cabin, but the doors and windows were still sealed shut. They were trapped. Days turned into weeks, and the friends were still trapped in the cabin. They had no food or water and were slowly losing their minds. As the days passed, the spirits became more violent. They would slam doors shut, turn over furniture, and throw objects across the room. One day, the friends managed to break through a window and escape. They ran into the woods, trying to find their way out, but the forest was dense and unfamiliar. They heard the whispers and footsteps behind them, and they knew they were being chased. They stumbled upon a clearing and saw a small, old cabin. They ran inside, hoping to find some shelter from the spirits. The cabin was dusty and abandoned, but it was better than being outside. They decided to rest for a while and regroup. As they were sitting in the cabin, they heard a faint knocking on the door. They hesitated to open it, but curiosity got the best of them. When they opened the door, they saw a group of locals standing outside. They were holding torches and pitchforks, and their eyes were filled with hatred. The locals accused the friends of disturbing the spirits and warned them to leave the area immediately. They didn't want any outsiders meddling with the spirits that had been haunting their town for generations. The friends were confused and scared. They had no idea what was happening or why they were being targeted. As they tried to leave the cabin, they heard a loud roar coming from the woods. It was unlike anything they had ever heard before. It was a mixture of a growl and a scream. They ran as fast as they could, trying to escape the roaring beast. They stumbled upon an old cemetery and hid behind a gravestone. As they were hiding, they saw a figure emerge from the woods. It was the woman from the cabin, the one who had touched the planchette. She was leading a pack of wolves, and they were snarling and baring their teeth. The friends realized that the spirits they had awakened were not the only ones haunting the woods. They had also disturbed a powerful beast that was now hunting them down. They knew they had to leave the woods, but they had no idea how. They were lost, and the spirits were closing in on them. As they were running, they saw a light in the distance. It was a small town, and they knew they had to make it there if they wanted to survive. They ran towards the town, hoping to find some help, but the spirits and the beast were still hot on their trail. They made it to the town, but the locals were not friendly. They could see the hatred in their eyes, and they knew they were not welcome. The friends realized that they had stumbled upon a town that was cursed by the spirits and the beast. They had awakened something that had been sleeping for centuries, and now they were paying the price. They knew they had to find a way to break the curse and put the spirits and the beast to rest. They spent days researching and talking to the locals, trying to find any information that could help them. Finally, they found a way to break the curse. They had to go back to the cabin and perform a ritual that would appease the spirits and the beast. They returned to the cabin, armed with candles, salt, and holy water. They performed the ritual, and the spirits and the beast disappeared. The friends were relieved, but they knew they could never forget what had happened. They had learned that sometimes, it's better to leave things alone, and not meddle with the supernatural. They had learned that some things are better left undisturbed, or else they may awaken something that should have stayed asleep.
I hope you enjoy the content I upload. If you like what I'm doing, why not think about clicking on the subscribe button to keep up to date on my uploads. Thank you all for the great support.
It was the first day of spring break, and 5 friends decided to take a trip to a secluded cabin in the woods. They had heard about this place from a friend of a friend and thought it would be the perfect spot to unwind and party. As they made their way down the dirt road leading to the cabin, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The trees seemed to be closing in around them, and the only sounds they could hear were the rustling of leaves and the chirping of crickets. Finally, they arrived at the cabin, and as they stepped out of the car, they could feel a chill in the air. The cabin was old and dilapidated, and there was something ominous about it. But the friends brushed off their unease and decided to explore their surroundings. They went for a walk in the woods, taking in the beauty of nature around them. As they walked, they stumbled upon an old abandoned graveyard. It was covered in weeds and vines, and the headstones were weathered and decayed. The friends laughed nervously as they read the names on the headstones. But as they turned to leave, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold. It was a low, guttural growl, and it seemed to be coming from the graves themselves. They ran back to the cabin, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they locked the doors and windows, they could hear the growling getting louder and more persistent. It sounded like something was trying to break into the cabin. The friends huddled together, trying to figure out what to do. But they soon realized they were not alone. They could hear footsteps outside, and they could see shadows moving in the moonlight. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door, and it shook on its hinges. The friends screamed in terror as they realized they were under attack. They could hear the sounds of claws scratching at the door and windows, and they knew they were in grave danger. One of the friends decided to take matters into his own hands. He grabbed a kitchen knife and flung open the door. But what he saw made him freeze in his tracks. Standing in front of him was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was a tall, humanoid figure with long, razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes. Its skin was mottled and scaly, and it smelled like decay and rot. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream, and the friends stumbled backward in terror. The other friends rushed to his aid, but it was too late. The creature had already sunk its claws into his flesh, tearing him apart in a frenzy of violence. The friends screamed and cried as they watched their friend die, but they knew they had to act fast if they wanted to survive. They barricaded themselves inside the cabin, piling furniture against the doors and windows. But they knew it was only a matter of time before the creature broke through. As the night wore on, the friends huddled together in fear, listening to the sounds of the creature outside. They could hear it scratching at the walls, and they could feel its hot breath on their necks. Finally, as the sun began to rise, the sound stopped. The friends cautiously made their way outside, only to find that the creature had disappeared without a trace. They never spoke of that night again, but they could never forget the horror they had experienced. And as the years went on, they began to hear stories about a creature that roamed the woods, preying on unsuspecting travelers. The legend of the creature became a cautionary tale, warning people to stay away from the woods during spring break. But for those 5 friends, it was a reminder of the danger they had faced and the lives that had been lost. Years went by, and the friends tried to move on from the trauma of that night. They went their separate ways, starting families and careers, but they could never fully escape the memory of the creature in the woods. One day, one of the friends received a call from a mutual acquaintance. The acquaintance had just returned from a spring break trip in the same area where the friends had encountered the creature. The acquaintance told the friend that he had stumbled upon a group of college kids who had also heard about the cabin in the woods. They had decided to take their chances and stay there for the week. But on their first night, they had encountered the same creature that the friends had encountered years ago. The creature had killed one of the students before disappearing into the woods. The friend felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to the story. He knew that he had to warn others about the danger that lurked in the woods. He contacted the authorities and told them everything he knew about the creature. They didn't believe him at first, but after investigating the area, they found evidence that something was indeed lurking in the woods. They set up traps and cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature. And finally, one night, they succeeded. They captured footage of a tall, humanoid figure with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. The authorities were shocked by what they saw, but they knew they had to act fast to protect the people in the area. They sent out warnings to all the nearby towns, advising people to stay away from the woods during spring break. The legend of the creature in the woods became more widespread, and people began to take the warnings seriously. No one wanted to end up like the friends or the college students who had encountered the creature. Years went by, and the friends who had encountered the creature eventually reunited. They visited the area once more, wanting to see if anything had changed. To their surprise, they found that the cabin in the woods had been torn down. In its place, a small memorial had been erected, honoring the lives that had been lost to the creature. The friends stood together in silence, paying their respects to their fallen comrade and the college students who had met the same fate. They knew that they had been lucky to make it out alive, and they were grateful for the warning they had received. As they walked back to their car, they couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The creature in the woods was no longer a threat, and they could finally put the horror of that night behind them. But as they drove away, they couldn't help but wonder if there were other dangers lurking in the world, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting travelers. And they knew that they would never be able to forget the horror of their spring break gone wrong.